Now, Senator King does a caucus with the Democrats, but is an independent from Maine. And Senator King, I was sitting there listening to both Prime Minister Cameron and to the President, and it was clear Prime Minister Cameron is much more, I guess, hawkish, if you will, wanting to go in sooner. When he talked about Syria, he led with two very important numbers: 80,000 killed and hundreds of thousands displaced, talking about the refugee situation. Prime Minister Cameron seems to be leaning forward, if you will, more so than the President. Is that appropriate? Should the President be leaning as forward as Prime Minister Cameron is?
I don't think so. I think the President is taking the right, prudent position. I know in the last segment you talked about that extraordinary interview yesterday on Face the Nation with Robert Gates. He also had a lengthy discussion of Syria. And I can tell you from being on both armed services and intelligence, there are no good options in Syria. It is a very complex situation. It makes Iraq look simple. It's a civil war within a civil war. If we start arming people, we may end up arming people that are going to use those arms against us. Then you've got the whole problem of the chemical weapons that are now scattered all over the country in different depots. It's a very complex situation, and I think we really have to have a clear assessment, number one, of the intelligence. We know about going into wars in the Middle East on incorrect or incomplete intelligence, so we need to really know what's going on. Number two, we need to know what our mission is, and number three, we need to know how to get out. And my concern is you start with a no-fly zone, you end up bombing anti-aircraft facilities, and you end up in a war.
What should our mission be?
Well, I think our mission is to try to bring to bear whatever international pressure that we can. And the key breakthrough may have been earlier this week when John Kerry had that lengthy meeting in Moscow, and the Russians are now ready to sponsor an international conference to try to bring the Assad regime and the opposition into the same room and negotiate what amounts to a graceful exit for Assad. That would be the best solution. The Russians are a very important player here, and that could turn out to be the only piece of good news about Syria that I've heard in the last couple of months.
When does this humanitarian crisis call for U.S. action?
Well, that's a really good question, and Robert Gates asked that question. I mean, there are humanitarian crises that occur on a fairly regular basis around the world, and the question is, what is our responsibility? Now, we are giving, I think, something like $500 million in humanitarian aid for the refugees and the people that are flowing out of Syria. But again, the question is, when do we decide that we have to jump in and intervene in a civil war? These are decisions that have to be made on a case-by-case basis. It worked in Bosnia. Would it work in Syria, or would it actually make things worse? And right now, the intelligence and what I've seen, to me, indicates that it would be a mistake to try to jump in. It could actually make it worse. Once Assad goes, then there's a whole new set of problems, because the opposition ranges from al-Qaeda and al-Nusra, which are jihadists, and to more moderate democratic groups. There's going to be another civil war. And as I say, it's a very complex situation. And I'm not saying we should never go in, but right now I think the President, by being sort of cautious on this, is making the right call.
Do you have any unanswered questions about the Benghazi attack?
Well, I think the only unanswered, well, there are a couple, I guess. The one is, could they have gotten that group of people there from Tripoli sometime during the night that would have been able to help? What I've heard is that probably not. And there were also concerns about moving people out of Tripoli. Part of the context that's been forgotten, there were over 30 protests going on around the world during this week involving this perceived to be anti-Muslim video. 5 of them involved attacks on diplomatic missions. So there was a lot going on that week. Whether we could have gotten military people there in time, all the testimony I've seen at the various hearings is the answer is no. The question now is, was there some kind of cover-up? I think we ought to have a look at those documents. I've seen them in the Intelligence Committee. I don't know why the White House shouldn't just make them available generally. The emails that went back and forth about the famous talking points, and then we can get to the bottom of whether there was some effort to cover things up. I don't think
Well, you say they released them. It sounds like, so you've seen them. You've seen the emails.
I have. It was in a
do you think there was an attempt to cover up?
I spent a couple of hours in a closed Intelligence Committee meeting, literally reading through the emails with other members of the committee, and concluded at the end that I didn't see anything that looked like a smoking gun in terms of some things being covered up. It looks like, you know, it was talking points written by a committee, which almost by definition is never a very good process. Right. But, you know, I understand about executive privilege. I'm a former governor. On the other hand, this is going to nag the administration. I think they ought to just release this information and let the Congress look them over and let the public decide. My conclusion was that it looked to me like, you know, I would second guess some of the decisions, but I didn't see anything that looked like a political cover-up.
All right, Angus King, the independent senator from Maine, who caucuses with the Senate.